How's it going, guys? It's Avi from Weather Storm 5000. Today is September 4th, 2019, as Hurricane Dorian is currently 100 miles south of the South Carolina coast, and it is moving around northwest at around 8 miles per hour, and its winds has increased since the last update to 110 miles per hour, and the millibar pressure continues to go down, which is quite interesting in my opinion. And what I've been noticing over the past several advisories is that the millibar pressure has been going down very quickly. Before, I think it was like 966. Now it's down to 955. And usually when the millibar pressure goes down that much, you would often see a correlation with the winds. When the millibar pressure goes down like 10 millibars, the winds might go up 10 miles per hour. But I haven't been really seeing those winds increase as very correlated to the millibar pressure, which is giving me the idea that although the inner core winds aren't really increasing much, I believe that the wind field of this storm is definitely widening due to the bronchoclinic instability that this shortwave trough is enforcing on this hurricane. And you could see that the hurricane has become a lot more expansive since it was over the Bahamas just 2 days earlier, due to this shortwave trough that's steering a lot of the outflow of this hurricane and the outer bands of this hurricane out to sea, and which is giving me the evidence that this hurricane is likely to take that turn sometime, maybe early tomorrow morning. It hasn't made that definitive turn yet, but we could obviously see that the shortwave trough is definitely having an effect on this hurricane by increasing the wind field, since it significantly increased since it was over the Bahamas. Even though the inner strength is weaker, the wind field has definitely been expanding, and I expect that to continue on, especially as this storm encounters more and more cooler air on the backside of it, making it turn more into an extratropical cyclone rather than a fully tropical cyclone, kind of like with Hurricane Sandy. Although it's nowhere near that event, it was nowhere near Sandy's caliber, but once the hurricane meets with cooler air, it usually expands its wind field because it becomes more than just an independent heat engine. It uses energy from other sources such as cool air, creating bronchoclinic instability and convection for these types of cyclones, and it usually transitions it from a tropical cyclone to an extratropical. But what does this mean is that since the winds are expected to expand with the storm, it might not be good news, because that would mean that the Northeast might get involved in tropical storm force winds, even though it might be hundreds of miles offshore. And also it might mean a prolonged event of tropical storm force winds over the Carolinas, and having a large, nearly Category 3 hurricane over the Carolinas is definitely not something you want to take lightly in the Carolinas, because it's not very often you see that hit the Carolinas. We saw obviously Florence last year, but that hit it brought a lot of flooding and devastation, don't get me wrong, but it still hit as a Category 1 hurricane, and it wasn't very large like this, or the winds aren't expanding like this hurricane as of right now. But this is borderline Category 3, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see it strengthen to a Category 3, even though we're seeing this storm turn more extratropical and the winds are expanding with this. As you can see, the inner eye has been more and more convective. You see those blacks, which means cooler cloud tops, and that usually means that there's stronger thunderstorms surrounding the eye. And I definitely wouldn't be surprised if we see a Category 3 strengthen next update, which should come in a few minutes actually. And it's due to the warmer waters it's encountering over the Gulf Stream. Since it was over the Bahamas and just off the coast of Florida for so long, the hurricane brought a lot of upwelling from the bottom of the ocean and the cooler waters from the bottom of the ocean. But since we're seeing this storm move a little bit more faster, it's moving away from all the cool water that this hurricane produced, that this hurricane brought up from the bottom of the ocean, and it's starting to move into more warm waters and in a more which is a better environment for the hurricane to continue to intensify over these warmer waters. And looking at it, you could see that there's not much dry air around it. There's a little bit of wind shear to the north of it, but as of right now, it isn't enough to really weaken the core of this storm. And in some ways, it actually might help this storm in several ways, because this cool air that might wrap around this storm might bring more instability with the storm for convection, and just overall might change this, might expand the wind field of this storm and increase the convection. As a result, the millibar pressure will stay low, even though the winds might be weakening, kind of like with Hurricane Sandy. But looking at the track of the current forecast track for this that the National Weather Service has been giving out, the track still makes it it's basically hugging the coast of South Carolina and North Carolina, based off of this forecast track. And a landfall certainly isn't out of the question for North Carolina. But even if this doesn't make landfall, like I said before, since the storm's wind field is expanding, impacts will stretch far beyond the eye. So a landfall isn't really needed to bring major impacts to the Carolina coast, since the eye is quite big. The current wind field for hurricane force winds is quite big, as I'll show you right now. You can see that even though the storm's offshore, we're already seeing these tropical storm force winds affect Charleston, Savannah, and the coastal portions of Florida. And you can see how big the hurricane force winds expand, and I expect that to only grow bigger as this shortwave trough continues to bring more cool air to the core and expanding this storm's wind field. So even though this might not make landfall, expect landfall-like conditions in the Carolina coast. So currently it's expected to weaken. I'm not sure about that. Maybe it might strengthen to 115 before it starts weakening from there. But I think what's inevitable is that the wind field will expand. And as for the impacts for North Carolina due to this, here are the rainfall totals, as 10 to 15 inches is not out of the question for a good portion of the coast of South Carolina, extending all the way up to Myrtle Beach. Wilmington might be involved, and 6 to 10 inches is expected all throughout the Carolina coast, as flash flooding is certainly a possibility with this storm, and even extending as far north as the Delmarva Peninsula. We could see 1 to 2 inches of rain, even if the storm stays mainly offshore of the Delmarva Peninsula. But for the track, it seems inevitable that it's going to go out to sea like this. We don't expect it to do any weird turn like to the northeast where it gets affected, or really just turn out to sea automatically. We expect that South Carolina, North Carolina will experience hurricane force wind conditions, at least hurricane force winds gusts, maybe up to 100 miles per hour with this, especially since there's still 110 mile per hour storm with a larger wind field. So hurricane conditions, I would say at this point, are likely in South Carolina, North Carolina. So prepare now for those residents, especially along the coast of the Carolinas, because there's borderline category 3 becoming larger and larger, and you don't want to, it's better to be safe than sorry in the Carolinas. But even extending as far north as Virginia, Ocean City, and portions of the Jamestown area, and maybe even the Chesapeake Bay area might experience tropical storm force winds at the very least. And I wouldn't be surprised if this storm takes this very western track, that even New Jersey, Long Island, and then Massachusetts gets involved with tropical storm warnings, with tropical storm force conditions expected along the coast of those areas, since this wind field will expand and continue to expand due to this shortwave trough, as it'll become a little bit more extra tropical by the time it reaches, by the time it's just off the coast of New Jersey. So the East Coast, the Mid-Atlantic, and Northeast certainly isn't out of the question when it comes to tropical storm force wind conditions. So I wouldn't let your guard down just yet in those areas. And coastal flooding, minor coastal flooding is certainly possible along the Northeast coast. But for North Carolina, South Carolina, expect more major coastal flooding possible, as the storm surge is 5 to 8 feet just around the Myrtle Beach area, which will inundate inundate cars, possibly houses, hotels. And so if you're along the coast and you've experienced, well, don't use past hurricane experiences all the time to determine that, oh, the storm surge won't reach my area, because every hurricane is different and storm surge is a dicey business. So it's better to be safe than sorry. If you live near the coast, I would heed those warnings that your town or state is giving you, and just take action. Just stay safe. It's better to be safe than sorry. And one of the leading causes of deaths in hurricanes is storm surge flooding. So you definitely don't want to mess with storm surge, as it's definitely no joke to be next to storm surge like that, as 4 to 7 feet is expected between Wilmington and near Cape Hatteras, and then even 2 to 4 feet is expected in Norfolk. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Delmarva Peninsula gets some coastal flooding as well. So definitely don't keep your guard down just yet in those areas. The rain will be heavy. Wind gusts, I would expect over 100 miles per hour, especially north of Myrtle Beach, and maybe even as far south as Charleston, not out of the question. And yeah, just prepare now, North Carolina coast, as if this was a major hurricane, because it borderline basically is a major hurricane, but with an even larger wind field. And I wouldn't be surprised if, let me check this next update, maybe it updated. Okay, no it didn't, but I wouldn't be surprised if in this next update it becomes a major hurricane. I don't expect much more strengthening in terms of the inner core much more, because I believe that this shortwave trough I believe this jet stream will tear apart this hurricane a little bit. Although it's becoming extra tropical, I expect those winds to expand, and as a result, the core winds will weaken as a result of that. But anyways, guys, I guess that's it. Carolina's prepared now, as I thank you guys for watching, and I hope you guys have a good day.